All right. Thank you so much for joining us for today's lecture, The Bipolar General, with retired Major General Gregg Martin. And I will go ahead and pass it over to Gregg.
Okay, thanks, Catherine. I really want to just say I appreciate everybody being on and let you know what a outstanding organization that I think NAMI is. I mean, it's just incredible. I'm so grateful that I got sort of, invited into the NAMI world. And Catherine, thanks for your leadership and for this invitation. Um, let's see, Jonathan, thank you. United Way is incredible. What a great organization. Thanks for your leadership and for what you do. Okay, so the name of the talk is Bipolar General, My Forever War with Mental Illness. And what I'm going to do in this talk is take you through um, a significant part of my lived experience, my life journey with bipolar disorder. And then I'm going to draw two conclusions that I'll get to in the talk. But conclusion number one is we have to own our condition. That if we don't own it and embrace it, then it will own us and threaten and ruin our lives. So that's conclusion number one. Conclusion number two is that stigma is the greatest barrier and deterrent to people seeking mental health assistance and help. It's the biggest impediment. And so what we all need to do, and I know I'm sort of preaching to the choir with NAMI, we need to help stop the stigma. It's so important to improving mental health across the country and really around the world. So I'm going to offer some ideas on how we can do that. So let me jump into my lived experience. When I came down with bipolar disorder and was diagnosed, and my behavior was really bizarre and over the top, some people describe me as wacko, dangerous, scary, psycho. In the midst of severe bipolar disorder, people close to me called me crazy and exhorted me to just be positive and grateful for all your blessings, and your depression will just go away. Snap out of it, Gregg. You have so much to be thankful for. My wonderful mother was of the Depression World War II generation that simply did not believe in mental illness, and she thought it reflected weakness and a lack of willpower, as did so many other people who I knew. They would say, just suck it up and pull yourself up by your bootstraps and out of the depression. You don't have anything to be depressed about. And again, they completely miss the point that it's biological, physiological, inside the inner workings and wiring and chemistry of the brain that was causing the depression. Just no concept of that. I had my first diagnosis of mental illness when I was 58 years old, when I was a general officer in the most powerful army in the world. At that time, I finally knew my brain was sick. And with the diagnosis, I had a target with a face on it that I could do battle with. When I got the diagnosis in the doctor's office, I hugged and thanked him and decided right then and there that I would own my diagnosis of bipolar disorder type 1 with psychotic features and not succumb to stigma, embarrassment, or shame. I reasoned that if I didn't own it, then it would own me. I'm still battling my bipolar disorder, which I'll call BD for short. I'm battling it every day. I'm in a forever war. It's never going to go away, and it's incumbent on me to manage it, which I'll talk about a little bit later. But my oath as an American soldier has strengthened and guided me. One of the lines is, I will always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit. And that's the kind of attitude that we all need to develop when we're dealing with mental health issues and conditions. You can never quit. You have to have the will to win. To give you perspective and understanding on where I'm coming from with regard to stigma and the illness, I'll provide a short synopsis of my bipolar journey and lived experience. if we could put on this short film that was made by the VA a year ago, I think it sort of captures my story in a very concise manner. If we could just play that. I was born unknowingly with what they call a bipolar brain, completely unknown to me or to the Army or to anybody, which gave me tremendous energy, drive, enthusiasm. If people had known what they were seeing, they would have said, there may be something going on with this guy. Hello, I'm Greg. I served in the U.S. Army from 1975 to 2015, and my branch was engineers. Once I graduated from West Point in '79, I went to Army Ranger School, and then I did all the jobs that you do as an Army officer, and then I ended up making 1-star and 2-star general. In 2003, I had a triggering event, the Iraq War, and it sent me into mania. But it was a high-performing mania in which I performed better than I ever had in my life. I felt like Superman, bulletproof, didn't need sleep. After being manic for almost a year, I fell into terrible depression. I went to the doctor during the mental health screening and said, hey, there's something wrong with me. And the doctors evaluated me and they said, you're fine, there's nothing wrong with you. And they couldn't see past my success, high-ranking officer. 11 years after the Iraq War, I went into full-blown mania. I had paranoid delusions that people were out to get me. They were spying on me. They wanted to see me arrested, put in jail, tortured, murdered in prison. But when I would dip into depression, it would be the opposite. And all I wanted to do was to die. I ended up getting removed from command, which is a nice way to say I was fired, forced to retire, and then later hospitalized. And I, on my own, went back to the same doctors and said, hey, doctor, there's something really, really wrong with me. And this time my wife came and she said, you know, he was manic before and now he's depressed. They connected the dots and they said, oh, mania, depression, bipolar disorder. I am not going to be stigmatized, embarrassed, ashamed. A battle buddy from the Army and my wife got me into a very good VA hospital in White River Junction, Vermont. And it was tremendous treatment, medication, therapy, electroconvulsive therapy. So I actually spent 6 weeks living in the VA hospital. It stabilized me. It kept me from getting worse, but it didn't make me better. I didn't get better until a few months later when they prescribed lithium. Once I started taking lithium, within about 3 or 4 days, my symptoms vanished. They went away, and I came back to life with energy, enthusiasm, interest. So what my therapist, I think the most valuable thing she has done for me is to help me figure out what are the triggers. And think in a military setting, you have minefields. And what the military does is it tries to figure out where are the minefields, and you put like a fence around them. So what I figured out how to do was to say, this is a trigger, this subject, this event, this location, and I don't go there. I'm good about getting exercise and working out, going to the gym, going out for walks, things like that. I've got friends who are terrific. I've told all of them that I have bipolar disorder, and here's the symptoms of mania and depression. And I said, hey, when you see me going into either the mania or the depression, please come talk to me. Tell me that you're seeing these symptoms. If you have a mental health issue and you don't get help, you're looking at a path of destruction. Anything I can do to take my near-death experience, where I wanted to die every day for 2 years, and transform it into a plus, an inspiration for others, then that's what I do. Okay, Catherine, thanks for playing that. The next slide that I'm going to put up is a mood chart that I created to help depict and illustrate my bipolar story. And if you look at it, off to the left, it starts when I was a teenager, and it runs slightly above what they call a euthymic level, which is steady, balanced, no real issues. And you can see I'm a little bit above the line. And then I have, and the reason what they call it above the line is called hyperthymia, which is a near continuous low level mania, which gives extra energy, drive, enthusiasm, creativity, and the like. And then you can see I drop into depression when I went away to college. And then it kind of comes back up and it slowly works its way up. That first sort of high level rise is when I went to graduate school at MIT, where I really had an unbelievable performance I'll talk about. And then you can see I'm slowly inching my way up the bipolar spectrum until I had my triggering event. And then you can see I start going higher and then lower, and it continues on until I go on the far right, I go up into what's called full-blown mania, where I essentially lost my mind and was completely over the top, out of control. That's where I got fired, forced to retire, later hospitalized. But from there, that height, I crashed into crippling, hopeless depression and terrifying psychosis. Then once I got the right meds, I started coming up, and you can see off to the far right, that's where I am today. I've got little blips of low level hypomania. Not bad, but you have to keep an eye on them because the way a relapse can start is just with a little blip of hypomania. If you don't get it under control, that could, rise into actual mania again, and you have a full blown relapse. And then you can see I have little dips of depression. And, I work hard to manage it. I've got all kinds of techniques and things that keep it under control. But you can see that it hasn't gone away. It's just that it's being dealt with at a much lower, more manageable level. So let me tell you about the storm. Okay, this was 11 years ago. I got a call on a Friday afternoon in July of 2014. I was a two-star general with 35 years of service, and I was the president of National Defense University, which is the nation's most prestigious military school. I was told to report to my boss, General Martin Dempsey, who was the chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, which is the nation's highest ranking military officer. I was told to report on Monday morning at 10 a.m. in the Pentagon. In my sick brain, which I didn't know was sick at the time, I wondered, will this be a promotion? Or maybe I'll get fired. I had worked for General Dempsey 4 times in my career. He was a mentor and we had a great relationship. I reported to him as requested that day and saluted. He strode across his office and gave me a warm hug. Gregg, I love you like a brother. You've done an amazing job. I give you a grade of A+. No one could have achieved what you've done in transforming the university and in just 2 years. But your time at National Defense University is over. You have until 5 p.m. today to resign or you're fired. And I'm ordering you to get a psychiatric evaluation this week at Walter Reed. What are your questions? So do you think I was disappointed? No, I wasn't at all because I was so manic. And I said, no question, sir. Thank you. And I gave him a hug and said, God put me in this job. He removed me, and now he's got bigger things for me to do. Ironically, I was right, as my work as a mental health advocate and bipolar warrior these past 8 years is by far the most important work I've ever done. And General Dempsey agrees. He wrote a superb foreword to my book. So that same month, I underwent 3 psychiatric evaluations, each while in a state of full-blown mania. And 3 times I was misdiagnosed as fit for duty, meaning in perfect health. But they were wrong. They got the diagnosis completely wrong. I had serious, severe bipolar disorder. As brutally decisive as General Dempsey's act might seem, I now think it was necessary and the right thing to do. He may have saved my life. Not only from the ravages of bipolar disorder, but I've since learned also from possibly a heart attack or a stroke, which is something I didn't realize until fairly recently, that when you're in full-blown mania, how dangerous a condition is and the stress it puts on your important organs. I don't think General Dempsey was influenced by stigma. He was really focused on taking care of me and his university. Leading up to his decision, he had received dozens of anonymous reports from my faculty, students, and staff that detailed my bizarre behavior, which then led him to conduct a comprehensive assessment and investigation. I believe his analysis and decision were thorough, wise, and fair. I needed medical help, and I could not get well if I stayed on as university president. And General Dempsey knew, said, hey, I know this guy, Gregg Martin. I've seen him for years. There's something going on. There's something not right. These reports coming in from his university really point to something going on in terms of mental and emotional well-being. And he made the decision, hey, I'm going to take care of Gregg and get him out of there. And I'm going to take care of the university by putting someone who isn't dealing with these issues in. I now know that growing up, I had a hyperthymic personality. You can see that on the chart. By the way, that term is not in the DSM. It's not in there anywhere. But now it is largely recognized and validated by scientific research. But unknowingly, I lived on the bipolar spectrum for years, and it helped me enormously. It took and boosted my natural abilities and talents, and it enhanced them with extra energy, drive, enthusiasm, creativity, and problem-solving skills. I excelled at pretty much everything I did, from high school through being a senior officer. And it was as a student, an athlete, a leader. One thing, when I was in my 20s, I actually ran 7 sub 3 hour marathons, including a 2:36, which, I don't even know if I would have run marathons if I hadn't had hyperthymia. I excelled in key commands in military schools, from West Point Ranger School to the Army War College, from company commander to brigade commander to commander of Fort Leonard Wood. I excelled in civilian grad school at MIT, where my mission from the Army was to obtain 1 master's in engineering. I came out with 2 masters, and then shortly after finished my Ph.D. That was my bipolar brain at work. I mean, it amplified whatever intelligence and work ethic I had. And the thing with bipolar disorder is, much of the time you're extremely successful, and the success masks the potential underlying condition. So people looked at me and said, wow, this guy must be really smart. What a hard worker. He got all these degrees from MIT, a really hard school. And nobody ever thought, and least of all myself, and said, man, like, I wonder if everything's okay with this guy. I mean, that's kind of like a superhuman performance. But nobody picked up on that, including me, my bosses, anybody. But that's one of the reasons bipolar disorder is so tricky to diagnose, is that so much of the time it enhances your success and people are blinded by that success. And you all know how many, thousands of incredibly successful people they find out later live with bipolar disorder. You know, in, World Bipolar Day, Vincent van Gogh, maybe the best painter of all time, his bipolar disorder greatly enhanced his artistic ability. But it also made him, absolutely obsessed. He was a complete zealot, and he did a lot of very, very unhealthy things, which goes with the condition. But anyway, hyperthymia enhanced my talents, but I was slowly, year by year, into my 40s, inching my way up the bipolar spectrum toward actual BD. And you can see that on the chart, the way I just was working my way up eventually towards full-blown mania. And this idea of a bipolar spectrum is also not in the DSM, although in the psychiatric community and in the bipolar research field, it's absolutely accepted. It's 100%. And it's interesting. When I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I had pretty serious bipolar disorder. And I said, okay, I totally accept that I have BD. What did I have the day before the diagnosis? What did I have? Or the day before the triggering event? What did I have? And my psychiatrist said, you didn't have anything. You went from perfectly healthy to then it was triggered and then you had bipolar disorder. And I said, that absolutely can't be true. That makes no logical sense at all. It couldn't have happened that fast because I had years and years of really heightened energy, creativity, drive, and so forth. And you can see that on the chart. And so the chart really, without trying to depict the bipolar spectrum, it shows it very clearly. And that is now accepted widely in the psychiatric community. But don't expect to find it in the DSM. I'm sure the next version it will be in. Throughout my career, as I was being promoted from second lieutenant to two-star general with ever more important and prestigious assignments, my BD was flying under the radar, unknown, unrecognized, and undiagnosed to me and everyone around me. Eventually, I cycled into higher highs and lower lows with psychosis, which are delusions and hallucinations. Again, my success masked my BD. I would go in and get evaluated or looked at, and all they would see is success, all these, schools, commands, degrees from MIT, and so forth. And they couldn't see it. They couldn't see the BD. At age 47 in 2003 in the Iraq War, I was a key battlefield commander in charge of more than 10,000 soldiers in fierce combat, rapidly anticipating and creating solutions to complex, unexpected problems while under fire, often making life and death decisions. This experience altered the wiring and chemistry of my brain. And that's what the doctors in both the Army Medical Department and the VA, that was their conclusion, that that was the actual triggering event. And you can see it on the chart. Let's see, where'd it go? Iraq. It's right under life at the top. It's bipolar onset in Iraq. That's where both the Army and the VA said was my trigger. In 2003, I shot into my first real mania when we attacked from Kuwait into Iraq. I felt like Superman, bulletproof, and performed brilliantly by all accounts. I was mostly happy, euphoric, and joyful, punctuated by um, fear, rage, and terror. That so it was mostly happy, mostly up with these punctuations and depression. So depression, fear, and rage, anger were sort of the punctuation points in my mania. But after redeployment to Germany, I fell into almost a year-long depression. In that experience, Iraq and then back to Germany was my first full up-down BD cycle. And you can see that BD mostly helped me until it didn't. By spring and summer of 2014, I had skyrocketed into full-blown mania, which I describe as madness and insanity. I was disruptive, bizarre, over the top, frightening, out of control. I swung from euphoria and extreme enthusiasm to agitation, anger, and rage, infused with delusions, hallucinations, and paranoia. I barely slept for about 3 months. My speech became more rapid and pressured. New ideas flowed continuously. My grandiosity and religiosity soared. I talked nearly nonstop. I stopped doing paperwork. My meetings ran over. I constantly interrupted people. I was repeatedly late, often out of uniform, and my risk-taking and lack of self-control were severe. I believed I could fly, that I was the smartest person on earth, that my enemies were spying on me in a plot to get me fired, convicted of crimes, jailed, and murdered. I believed I held the key to world peace and was God's apostle on a mission to transform my university and the Department of Defense. Like the Apostle Paul, who had become my hero during this period of intense mania and religiosity, I had become all things to all people. I saw the Holy Spirit descend, watched as demons attacked our house, and I repelled them with Bibles, crosses, and holy water. And there was much, much more. I had rocketed to the apex of bipolar mania, a blissful heaven of psychotic delusion. Now people noticed finally and began sending dozens of anonymous reports to my boss, leading to my being removed from command. I didn't feel it yet, but in truth, I was the burning shell of the person I had been just months before. My soul had been stripped out by an invisible disease, and I still bear the scars. But with mania, what goes up must come down. After I was fired, there was a brief period of serene weightlessness, but in a matter of weeks, I entered free fall. I had begun my descent into bipolar hell, a world of hopeless, crippling depression and terrifying psychosis. In the months after stepping down as president of National Defense University, my psychotic brain absolutely convinced me that disgruntled employees had set me up for the fall and orchestrated my firing. And then the three fit for duty psychiatric exams, where I saw them as proof of my fitness. I hadn't lost my mind. People were out to get me and they had plotted against me. My euphoric mania transformed into intense bitterness, anger, and rage. I felt betrayed by my people in the military I had served for 35 years. And that's an example of moral injury where I felt my beloved institution that I had served loyally betrayed me and stabbed me in the back. Even though I later realized General Dempsey had done me a big favor that day by removing me from a very hostile, high pressure, no win situation, or the worst possible outcomes of my acute mania, which could have been much worse than just getting fired and forced to retire early. I could have had loss of marriage, loss of retirement benefits and finances. I could have been incarcerated, could have had violent encounters and been killed. And that happens a lot with people with severe bipolar disorder. Over the next 4 months, I spiraled, then crashed into a complete breakdown, mind, body, and spirit. I went from euphoric mania to despair, malignant depression, and harrowing psychosis. I had never felt so weak, crippled, and helpless. As my sick brain caused me to descend into bipolar hell, things went from bad to worse over the next 2 years. It was indescribably awful, and I had no hope at all. I believed I would never recover. All I wanted to do was to die. And you can see on the chart that deep dive on the far right. That's what I call bipolar hell. In November of 2014, I forced myself to go back to Walter Reed, saw the same doctors who had previously misdiagnosed me as being perfectly healthy, and based on key collateral information from my wife Maggie, I was finally diagnosed properly with BD type 1 and psychosis 12 years after onset in Iraq. And a key point here, because I know we have a lot of mental health professionals, this idea of collateral information, I think, is critical and should be employed much more often than it is. I understand that the doctors, the psychiatrists, and therapists are very busy and they don't have a lot of time. But if a patient goes in and is one-on-one with the doctor or therapist, there's only so much information and understanding they can get out of that appointment. But if you bring in a spouse, a family member, a work colleague, a friend, then you get a much more complete and full picture, a more accurate picture, and help the doctors connect the dots. And for me, it was really my wife in that appointment that caused the lights to go on for the doctors when she said, he's terribly depressed right now, but when you saw him before, he was manic. And then that enlightened the doctors. They connected the dots and they gave what I think is the correct diagnosis. Both the VA and the Army Medical Department conducted independent inquiries and determined that the BD onset was in 2003 at age 47 during the Iraq War, and that my genetic predisposition was triggered by the intense stress, thrill, pressure, and euphoria of leading all these troops in combat. And I decided right there when I got the diagnosis that I would own it and not be stigmatized and shamed or embarrassed. I think that those, sort of stigmatizing feelings are based on fear and ignorance. I knew that my bipolar disorder was physiologically real, like diabetes, cancer, and heart disease. It's just that it's invisible inside the brain. So I just decided I'm not going to allow anybody to stigmatize me. And even though people have held a stigma against me, I haven't let it affect me at all, which is really a blessing. I feel pretty fortunate because I know it's hard and a lot of people really wrestle with the whole stigma concept. But anyway, I hugged and thanked my doctor. I had finally had a target with a face on it that I could do battle with. Parenthetically, I also had the lived experience of two of my sons' BD, which to me, I knew when I did my homework was clearly a physical malady of their brains. Their onsets were before mine as teenagers, and I helped both of them fight stigma. Today, we share a strong, helpful family bipolar bond. In a way, we've got our own little mini bipolar support program, with with supporters. I mean, it's interesting. My sons can really detect changes in my mood that you need to track, and I can do the same with them. So it's kind of, I mean, we didn't want bipolar disorder, but the fact is we have it, and we can help each other out with a little buddy peer system. From 2014 to 2016, I lived in bipolar hell. For 2 years, I was sunk in hopeless depression, barely functioning, and I kept getting worse. I had terrifying psychosis, delusions of being spied on, arrested, beaten, stabbed, murdered in prison. I had continuous ideations of my own death and had a strong desire to die. I could feel a powerful, invisible force grabbing me around the chest and throwing me under a speeding 18-wheeler or steer me into oncoming trucks. Every morning, a giant boa constrictor snake slithered out of the woods, eyes blazing and tongue flickering, and crushed the life out of me. These morbid thoughts of death and dying are called passive suicidal ideations. I had never heard of that concept. And of course, they were anything but passive to me. They were alive and real and terrorizing. I could feel and smell my own death. Now, where this idea of passive suicidal ideations, and this is a super important concept for the medical profession, is when I finally went to the VA hospital for help, the psychiatrist asked me, "Are you suicidal?" I said, "No." "Do you want to hurt yourself?" "No." "Do you want to hurt others?" "No." And then he asked the question that nobody has ever asked me since, even though it should be every doctor should ask this. He said, "Do you ever have morbid thoughts of death or dying?" I said, "Yes, I have them all the time, every day." And he said, "Describe them." And so I told him what I just told you a minute ago. And he sat up and said, "Okay, this is very, very serious. These are passive ideations, suicidal ideations, which means you want to die. You want your life to end, but you don't want to do it yourself. You want somebody or something else to take your life." And the danger with these passive ideations is they can rapidly transform into active ideations. You decide to do it yourself, you develop a plan, and you take your own life. He said, "Hey, you need to stay with us in the psychiatric ward for a while until we get this under control." And so this I think this idea of passive ideations, that question he asked, "Do you have morbid thoughts of death and dying?" That should be like a mandatory question that every doctor asks, every psychiatrist, every therapist, every social worker, and find out if people have this ideation, because it can lead to death fairly easily. So anyway, during bipolar hell, when I wasn't staring off into space and ruminating about every mistake I had made in my life, I would throw myself onto the hardwood floors, yelling, banging my head, punching myself in the face. I was angry at God. My love of God and my religiosity transformed into anger and bitterness. I was like, "God, why did you ruin my life? This is so unfair." And I felt bad for myself. And, what I needed to do was to do what I told you at the beginning, embrace my condition, embrace the suck. But I went through a period where I didn't have the mental toughness to embrace it. And, I kind of was a baby about it, and really kind of had a quitter's attitude, and which thankfully I've transformed that, and developed this real will to win. But anyway, my wonderful wife Maggie and a devoted friend and battle buddy got me into a great VA hospital in White River Junction, Vermont, for excellent inpatient care. A multidisciplinary team of medical professionals treated me, lifting my spirits and stabilizing my brain. I spent 2 weeks in the locked psychiatric ward, then 4 more weeks living in the hospital dorm while I underwent more intensive treatment, including 14 rounds of electroconvulsive therapy, or ECT. Following my 6 weeks of living in the hospital, I went back 2 days a week for 6 more months until we moved to Florida. in addition to focused psychiatric sessions, my wife and I did marriage counseling. My wife kind of got to the end of her rope and said, "Hey, we need to go see a marriage counselor," which we did. And big surprise, they said, "Okay, the key to resolving your issues is, Gregg, you have to get your bipolar disorder under control, and then I think your marriage will be fine." And they were right. Um, I went to every relevant program while I was living at the VA, including Alcoholics Anonymous, which was to me eye-opening and inspirational, even though I was not an alcoholic. I think the principles of AA are so powerful. And I have a bunch of friends who are in AA, and I'm actually thinking about going back into AA just to meet some of these great people who are wrestling and fighting against this terrible addiction of alcohol, just for inspiration and friendship. I was eagerly willing to try anything that might help me break my depression and improve. The amazing VA chaplain helped me through with her compassionate spiritual care. All this treatment at the VA stabilized me and kept me from getting worse, but it was still 6 more months of bipolar hell until lithium, a natural salt harvested from the earth, that saved me. And it's almost 9 years now. And I mentioned earlier in the video, um, I had terrible, terrible depression and other symptoms. And within a week of starting to take lithium, those symptoms went away. They just vanished. And I reclaimed my life and started building a whole new life. You could probably see it on the video. My hands have tremors. That's the only negative side effect that I have from lithium. And so that's, an irritation, but it's worth it to me to have a healthy brain, and I put up with the tremors. So in August 2016, I was prescribed lithium, and this began my journey of recovery. And we quickly thereafter moved to Florida, which was a strategic move to get the brightness, the sunshine, the warmth, which was so therapeutic after living, these long, cold, dark winters up in New Hampshire. But I call it a journey because I'm in a forever war. There's no cure and no end to my condition. I must own and manage my BD every day for life. Once I started the lithium, I felt good and happy for the first time in years. I could start rebuilding my shattered life. And I would say that medications are critical. Now, there are people who are treatment resistant. Like I've got a really good friend who's a Ph.D. scientist, mental health expert, and her bipolar disorder is treatment resistant. And everything she's tried had all these negative side effects. So she has had to manage her bipolar disorder with everything but medication, which is super hard to do. I mean, she said, "I wish I had a medication I could take that would help me, but there's nothing." Um, so I think it's medication is really important. And there are also people who figure out how to wean themselves off of pharmaceutical medications. And I say more power to them. But I've talked to a bunch of really expert psychiatrists and bipolar researchers, and they said, "Gregg, why would you want to get off these medications when they're working for you, and you would put yourself at great risk for a catastrophic relapse?" I said, "You're right." And so I've decided to stick with medication. But it took a team to lift me up, including my wife, family, friends, medical professionals, religious leaders, and grace from God. They gave me the hope and knowledge that I could and would recover. I would say that people and hope are absolutely critical. BD and other mental conditions, because I know NAMI is much bigger than just bipolar disorder, can strike anyone, young and old, rich and poor, educated and illiterate, privates and generals, male and female, CEOs and janitors, doctors and scientists, entrepreneurs and actors, all races. If left untreated, BD and other mental conditions often ruin marriages, families, careers, finances, and frequently lead to homelessness, addiction, prison, violence, and suicide. But the good news is that with treatment and perseverance, we can live happy, healthy, purposeful lives. Today, my life is happy, healthy, and purposeful. I'm thriving. My hyperthymic personality is back, though it's less intense. And my bottom line is that there is hope. Recovery is possible. I am living proof. It's key that the afflicted decide to own their condition, to embrace it and manage it, and not deny or hide from it. If we don't, then it will own us. My life's mission now is to share my BD story and to help stop stigma, promote recovery, and save lives. I love it. It's a cause bigger than myself and it serves others. So, I mean, that is my mission statement. I had a great mission for all those years in the Army, fighting to win the nation's wars, and everything focused on that. Now I've got this great mission to share my bipolar story, and it's so rewarding, and to get to meet phenomenal people like each of you. I mean, the last number of years that I've been doing this, I've met the best people in my entire life, and I have so much fun with them. They've turned into not just colleagues, but friends. And so anyway, yeah, that mission statement is important, and we all need to have that purpose, that mission in our life. My strategy for recovery is multidimensional. First, medications are key for balancing my brain chemistry. I'll take them every day for life. These pills are my friends. I need them. Second, therapy is very important. Plus, keeping my wife Maggie close, wired in, and engaged as my battle buddy or peer support specialist. She knows a lot, even though she hasn't gone to the formal courses. Thirdly, I maintain healthful living, diet, sleep, lots of exercise, plenty of water, low stress, etc. And those are the first three elements of my strategy. And they are necessary, but I don't think they're sufficient for a recovery that's built to last. They have to be anchored into what I call the 5 Ps. And the first P is purpose. We have to find or create a life mission that drives us forward. And only the individual, only we can do this for ourselves. So, purpose. The second is people, surrounding ourselves with happy, fun, energetic people who lift us up. And I mentioned earlier, this idea of full disclosure, I think is pretty powerful. So I've all my friends know I live with BD. And I told them, hey, here's what mania looks like, here's what depression looks like. If you see this, talk to me and Maggie and let me get a quick grip on it. But people is just absolutely critical. It's interesting by being disclosing and sharing my condition, I think people like me more and have more respect because I'm open and honest about, this condition. The third P is place, living to the extent possible where you want and where you can pursue your dreams and the things that you really want to do. And living in the warm, bright sunshine of Florida has really helped me. The fourth P is perseverance, cultivating the will to win and to never give up, the fighting spirit, never quit. Because as many of recovering and living a life with mental illness is not easy. It's not for the faint of heart. I mean, it's hard. And you're going to have, ups and downs and setbacks. Hopefully we won't have a relapse, which are really dangerous. But I mean, perseverance is super important. The fifth P is perspective, which to me is developing the ability to objectively get outside of your own head and think about your own thoughts, which is called metacognition. But this is super important. I'll give you an example. I told you earlier that I had really bad paranoia. People are thinking bad about me. They're out to get me. They want to hurt me. And now occasionally I'll just get a little sprout of paranoia where I'll think something like that. And then I have through perspective, I can get outside my own head and say, Gregg, stop, get a grip on it. They are not thinking bad thoughts. They're not going to try to harm you. In fact, they are not thinking about you at all. They're thinking about themselves, their own life, their family, their job. So get over it, dude, and move forward. Um, so those are the 5 Ps, and I think they all go together. So the bottom line of my BD journey is it helped me until it went too high, and then it nearly destroyed me. I had to get a proper diagnosis. That was absolutely critical. It was step one on my journey of recovery. And second, I had to decide that I would own my condition. Now I'm going to finish up with what I think is probably the most important part of the talk. It's about stigma. And you all can play, you already are playing a huge role just by being in NAMI and being active and being informed. But I think this idea of stigma is so, so important. And each of us can play a key role in crushing stigma. I've got a second talk that I give that's just on stigma, but we obviously don't have time today. And it's actually it's a paper that you can find if I can tell you where to find it if you want. You can get to it through my website, bipolargeneral.com. But anyway, it's a good paper, it's a good talk, but we don't have time today. But I'll give you the micro version. I'm issuing a call to action that we together stop stigma. And I think people are depending on us, especially as leaders in this field. And we have an obligation to lead what is really a social movement. BD and mental illness are physiologically real, like diabetes, cancer, heart disease, except they're in the brain. And it's not the afflicted person's fault. Stigma is a cruel mark. It's a form of prejudice, bigotry, discrimination that's based on fear and ignorance. And the terrible thing about it is it creates a two-front war for the afflicted person. The afflicted person with mental conditions has to fight the disease itself and then stigma. So two different fights going on. A good model to overcome the stigma of mental illness is breast cancer. If you go back 50 years ago, breast cancer was stigmatized. People felt ashamed, embarrassed. They didn't talk about it. They kept it in the closet until the first lady, Betty Ford, who came down with breast cancer, she said, I am not going to be stigmatized. I'm going to tell my story. We're going to do TV ads. We're going to be, on the radio, on TV. I'm going to do articles. I'm going to do interviews. I'm going to give talks. And she did. And she mobilized and inspired not just people in the United States, but all around the world who had breast cancer. And think where we are today, 50 years later, how this social movement has transformed it. Today, women battling breast cancer are seen as heroic warriors battling this deadly invisible disease. And during Breast Cancer Awareness Month, everybody wears pink ribbons, pink shoes, pink socks, pink ties. Even the National Football League players all wear pink shoes and socks. I mean, it's really awesome. And I think we need a similar social movement for mental illness. And I mean, there's no better place than NAMI to start it and to, move it forward. We together as leaders, we need to normalize the conversation that it's okay to not be okay. Mental illness, including bipolar disorder, touches everyone. And I got these stats from NAMI, but 20% of the population are afflicted with some type of mental illness or mental health condition. 20%, 1 in 5. But the other 80%, 4 out of 5, are affected by virtue of being friend, family, work colleague, neighbor. So that's 20% plus 80%, that's 100%. Everybody is somehow touched by mental illness. And when I give talks to, big audiences, small audiences, medium, and when I ask who has been touched, every single hand goes up every single time I ask the question. It's 100%. So we need leaders like each one of us, you and me, to stop stigma together. And that's why I've made this my life's purpose to share my story. So my question is, will you join me in this momentous social movement to stop stigma together? We need each one of you to help stop stigma and save lives. And with that, thank you very much. I look forward to your questions and comments.